Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into one of history's most enduring, most chilling mysteries, Jack the Ripper.
Uh,
I mean, just hearing that name, it conjures up images, doesn't it? Foggy London streets, unsolved horror.
Definitely. It's almost mythical.
But the problem is, for decades, sensationalism, lurid stories, urban myths, they've absolutely clouded the truth around this case. It feels more like fiction sometimes than actual history.
And that is precisely why Philip Sugden's The Complete History of Jack the Ripper is so important and why we wanted to tackle it.
Right.
This book, it isn't about feeding those myths. It's a really definitive, disciplined investigation. The whole aim is stripping away all that distortion to reveal what we actually know.
It's kind of a masterclass in historical rigor, isn't it?
It really is. It shows how easily fiction can just harden into fact if you don't have that rigorous scrutiny.
That meticulous approach, it really cuts through the noise, makes you trust his conclusions. So, given how much sensationalism has, like you said, muddied the waters, how does Sugden actually do that? How does he strip away the distortion? What's his core approach?
Well, it means he meticulously goes back to the primary sources, the contemporary
I
documents.
see the original files.
Exactly. Original police files, newspaper reports from the time, witness statements. He's trying to get as close as possible to the events as they actually happen, before all the layers of legend started to build up as obscure things.
That makes sense.
It's a powerful lesson, really, in historical literacy. It just underscores how critical it is to question those popular narratives, especially when a story feels almost too sensational.
That's a great point, how those first stories can just get stuck. And to really understand how these crimes happened and why they grabbed the public's attention so much, Sugden sets the scene. Victorian London's East End, specifically Whitechapel. What was that environment like, according to him?
Yeah, he paints a really vivid picture. It's a sprawling slum, just teeming with grinding poverty, rampant vice, and this undercurrent of casual violence that's honestly difficult for us to really imagine today. And it was a truly transient population there, too. You had migrants, the homeless, sex workers, criminals, all living right on the fringes of society.
So, a place where people could just disappear. Or where terrible things could happen without immediate notice. Is that why Sugden emphasizes this backdrop so much?
Precisely. Understanding this environment is absolutely vital. It helps explain how a killer could operate with such, brutal impunity, almost in plain sight, then just vanish into those labyrinthine streets.
Right.
And it also shines a light on why these crimes hit such a nerve with the public. They laid bare the really grim realities of Victorian London's social fabric, the deep inequalities.
That unsettling reality of Whitechapel, it must have been fertile ground for all the myths and sensationalism Sugden pushes back against. Now, what I found particularly compelling about Sugden's work is how he just meticulously dissects each murder. How does he manage to untangle fact from all the theories swirling around?
He's incredibly careful. He distinguishes between what's established fact, what's a prevailing theory, and what's just pure speculation. He really zooms in on the canonical 5 victims.
The core ones.
The core ones, yeah. But he also investigates others who might have been connected. It's probably worth starting with those who are often included, but Sugden is cautious about,
Okay.
like Emma Elizabeth Smith. April 1888, she was beaten and sexually assaulted by a gang. Sugden argues this was likely not a Ripper crime.
But it sets the scene.
It absolutely sets the tone for the kind of violence that was, frankly, commonplace in Whitechapel then.
And Martha Tabram, August 1888, brutally stabbed 39 times. She's often cited as a possible early victim.
She is. But again, Sugden remains cautious. The lack of throat slashing, the frenzied nature of the attack. It feels different from the more surgical precision seen later. He really focuses on the details that suggest a consistent but also evolving modus operandi.
That evolving pattern, it becomes terrifyingly clear when Sugden focuses on the canonical 5, doesn't it? Let's maybe walk through those. Marianne Nichols, August 31st, 1888, Bucks Row.
Yes. Her throat was slashed, lower abdomen mutilated. Sugden sees this as the likely start of the actual Ripper spree. He notes the mutilation wasn't as extensive as it became later.
Suggesting he was learning. Or developing.
Yeah, possibly evolving his technique, almost like a horrifying apprenticeship, as you said.
And then just a week later, September 8th, Annie Chapman, Hanbury Street. This is where the escalation seems undeniable.
Absolutely. Her uterus was removed, and apparently with some skill. It indicates a terrifying, anatomical knowledge. With Chapman, you see this clear escalation. The removal of the organ points to something specific, maybe some knowledge.
Then we get the chilling double event, September 30th. Elizabeth Stride killed in Dutfield's yard, throat cut, but crucially, no mutilations.
That's significant. Sugden argues the killer was likely interrupted, maybe by a passing cart, a noise. Something prevented him from completing his usual horrific ritual.
Like a glimpse behind the curtain, almost.
Kind of, yeah. A moment where chance seems to have intervened, maybe revealing something of the killer's routine or timing.
And within an hour of Stride's murder, Catherine Eddowes, found in Mitre Square. This one feels particularly daring.
It really was. Her abdomen ripped open, kidney removed. And then there was that piece of her apron stained with blood found with the infamous graffito nearby.
The Golston Street graffito.
Exactly. Sugden treats this as a pivotal Ripper crime. It was high risk, right in the city of London, far more daring than the previous attacks. Yeah. It shows this growing confidence, almost brazenness in the killer.
And finally, Mary Jane Kelly, November 9th, 1888, the most horrific murder of them all.
Unbelievably so. Found in her own room at Miller's Court, her body was, well, almost unrecognizable, mutilated beyond comprehension.
So Sugden argues this is the climax.
He argues this final canonical murder marks the climax of the Ripper's frenzy. Perhaps even a descent into disorganization, or maybe a complete mental collapse.
Wow.
When you look at the progression, it's fascinating in a morbid way. From Nichols's initial mutilation to the surgical aspect with Chapman, the interrupted Stride, the high-risk Eddowes, and then Kelly. Utterly frenzied brutality. It paints this horrifying picture of a killer whose methods, confidence, maybe even anatomical knowledge were just spiraling.
It's almost unthinkable. And trying to investigate that. Yeah. Imagine starting a major investigation with almost none of the tools we consider essential today.
Right.
It makes you wonder how many other historical cold cases are just impossible to solve for similar reasons. Sugden really gives us this exhaustive, kind of warts and all look at how the police handled this nightmare. What were their main limitations back then?
The challenges were just immense. Forensics were incredibly primitive. No fingerprints, as you said, no reliable eyewitness ID methods, certainly no CCTV. And add to that, the significant jurisdictional turf wars. You had the Metropolitan Police covering most of London, but the City of London Police had their own patch, right where Eddowes was killed. That often hampered coordination.
He mentions key figures, like Inspector Frederick Aberline. He was the seasoned detective on the ground in Whitechapel.
Yes, and Robert Anderson, the head of the CID, that's the Criminal Investigation Department. His leadership was apparently quite divisive.
And Donald Swanson, he managed a lot of the evidence.
That's right. Swanson painstakingly managed much of the Ripper evidence compilation. But these internal politics, coupled with, frankly, poor communication between the forces and just the sheer overload of cases the police were dealing with, it all contributed to their failure to catch the killer.
It really underscores how much modern investigations rely on things that simply weren't available back then.
Absolutely. It's a different world.
And it's against this backdrop, this limited policing, that the infamous Ripper letters started flooding in. That must have added another layer of chaos, right? Over 600 letters sent to police, media, many claiming to be the killer.
Oh, completely. And Sugden assesses these thoroughly. The Dear Boss letter, September 25th, 1888, that was the first to actually use the name Jack the Ripper.
Which probably wasn't the killer himself.
Sugden believes it was probably a journalist's hoax. Possibly even by a specific guy, Thomas Bulling, at the Central News Agency, trying to keep the story hot.
Makes sense for the time.
Then there was the Saucy Jackie postcard, postmarked October 1st, 1888, the day after the double event.
So it seemed like it had inside knowledge.
It did seem that way.
Yeah.
But again, Sugden views it as likely another folks playing on the news.
But then there's the From Hell letter. That arrived October 16th, 1888, and it came with half a human kidney. Does Sugden think this one stands out, or is it just more mythology?
He treats this one quite differently. He sees it as the most credible of all the letters, potentially authentic.
Ooh.
He doesn't say definitively it was the Ripper, but the enclosed organ. Yeah. Plus, it's stark, very non-literary style. It makes it eerily plausible compared to the others. It lacks that performative flair, the message feels much more direct, much more chilling.
And he applies that same critical lens to the parade of suspects, I assume? Who are some of the key figures Sugden really scrutinizes? What does his analysis reveal?
He certainly does. Take Montague John Druitt. He was a barrister, a school teacher, committed suicide weeks after Mary Kelly's murder, the last canonical one.
The timing looks suspicious.
Exactly. And a senior police officer did suspect him, But Sugden finds absolutely no link between Druitt and Whitechapel. No forensic evidence, no circumstantial evidence tying him to the crimes themselves.
So more of a convenient coincidence for the police theory than a real suspect?
That seems to be Sugden's take. Then there's Aaron Kuzminski, a Polish-Jewish immigrant, documented his mental illness. Some key police figures, like Anderson and Swanson, actually believe he was the Ripper.
Okay, what does Sugden say?
He questions it. Kuzminski had no known criminal history, wasn't known for violence. And crucially, he was institutionalized long after the killing stopped. The timeline doesn't quite fit the police theory there.
Anyone else?
Michael Ostrog, a career fraudster. Sugden dismisses him pretty quickly as just a non-violent con artist. Included more out of police desperation, it seems, than any real logic.
But there is one suspect Sugden finds more compelling, right? George Chapman, also known as Severin Klosowski.
Yes, he was a barber surgeon, later poisoned 3 of his wives, hanged in 1903. Sugden considers him one of the strongest suspects.
Why him specifically?
Well, he had anatomical knowledge from his barber surgeon background, he had a known violent past, and he was definitely in Whitechapel during the murders.
Okay, that sounds promising. Is there a catch?
The catch is the method. The Ripper used brutal surgical mutilation. Chapman later became a serial poisoner. That shift in M.O. from knife to poison makes some people doubt if it could be the same person. It's a fascinating puzzle.
And I imagine Sugden doesn't spend much time on the really wild theories, like royals or masons being involved.
Not at all. He dismisses those fringe theories, the royal conspiracy, Masonic cover-ups, the artist Walter Sickert. He sees them as either anachronistic, based on things people thought later, or just fabricated, lacking any basis in the actual historical record from 1888.
Right, his focus is strictly on verifiable evidence.
Exactly.
So, given all these factors, the limitations of policing, the chaotic environment, the hoax letters, it still begs the question, how could a killer this brutal vanish? What does Sugden say about why the Ripper could disappear without a trace?
Sugden really delves into the structure of Victorian life itself, that transient population we mentioned. It made tracking individuals extremely difficult.
Records weren't great.
Record-keeping for the poor was minimal, sometimes non-existent. People often lived under aliases. And crucially, the understanding of mental health was so primitive. Genuinely dangerous individuals could just roam freely without much intervention until they did something drastic. Anonymity was just far more achievable back then.
And what about why the murder stopped so abruptly after Mary Kelly? Does he have theories? Was it the climax, like you said?
He suggests several possibilities. The killer might have died, naturally or otherwise. He could have been incarcerated for some other unrelated crime, maybe emigrated, or perhaps just changed his behavior, or was finally institutionalized. That abrupt end after Kelly could well indicate the killer's removal from the scene, death, prison, asylum, rather than a conscious choice to stop.
Which leads to the big question. Sugden ultimately doesn't identify the killer, which in itself is a kind of powerful conclusion, isn't it?
It is. It respects the limits of the evidence.
So what does his rigorous historical discipline lead him to conclude instead? What kind of portrait does he paint of who Jack the Ripper likely was?
Well, he concludes the Ripper was likely a local man, someone familiar with Whitechapel's geography, possibly with some anatomical or slaughterhouse knowledge, given the nature of the mutilations. He clearly had a deeply disturbed psychological profile. Signs of sexual mania, a growing compulsion as the attacks progressed. But ultimately, Sugden stresses there is no smoking gun. The surviving evidence just does not point definitively to any single person.
It's frustrating but honest.
Absolutely. And Sugden's work powerfully highlights how the mythology fed by sensational newspapers, those hoax letters, our own modern obsessions, has tragically clouded the truth. It often prevents us from seeing the brutal, maybe even mundane reality.
Not some mastermind, but something else.
Exactly. Instead of some grand conspiratorial figure, Sugden paints this chilling portrait of a brutal serial killer who emerged from and then just vanished back into the dark, chaotic underbelly of industrial London.
And that really underlines why The Complete History of Jack the Ripper remains such a landmark book. Yeah. Probably the most comprehensive, balanced historical account we have.
It's a monumental achievement in historical investigation, yeah. His lasting contributions are significant. His unwavering reliance on primary sources, original police files, meticulously avoiding that lurid speculation.
And focusing on the victims, too.
Yes, giving full voice to the victims, not just obsessing over the killer. And he really exposes the limitations of Victorian law enforcement and also how the early media could manipulate a story. His work doesn't solve the case, no, but it reconstructs it better, more truthfully than anyone else ever has. It's almost a blueprint for how to approach any deeply entrenched historical mystery.
Sugden's work really does provide this powerful sense of clarity, historical grounding to a case that's just been shrouded in myth for way too long.
Hmm.
It's a potent reminder, isn't it, about the importance of rigorous historical inquiry, of going back to the original sources, especially when you're faced with these really entrenched narratives, applies to so much more than just this case.
Indeed. And it leaves us with a compelling thought, doesn't it? What is our lasting public obsession with unsolved mysteries like Jack the Ripper? What does that tell us about human nature? Or maybe our deep-seated desire for narrative closure, even when the facts, like here, remain frustratingly elusive.